Welcome to another session. I hope you're well. This is the second part of a two-part session, the first of which I began yesterday. The theme and the topic was dating with intentions. Now, for those who have not seen the first part, I think I would encourage you to pause this session, take a step back, watch yesterday's session or the first session, because today's session will be a continuation from where I stopped. I presented 13 intentions, or rather 13 ways to make your dating experience successful. The first was dating with intention, which was used as the topic for both sessions. Let me go through the 13 of them just to make sure that those who have already seen the first session are up to date or up to speed with where we start. Now, the 13 items, let me read them out for you. Number 1, I said date with intention. Number 2, date with the end in mind. Number 3, date with specificity and purpose. Number 4, date based on probabilities rather than possibilities. Number 5, date with a timeline in mind. And number 6 was date with a review process along that timeline. Those were the 6 items that I discussed in yesterday's session. Now, in today's session, I will pick up from number 7. I'm going to give you the remaining 7, but I'm going to present the remaining 7 by inverting those 7 items and begin with the end for a particular reason. And you will see how each of those items connect by beginning with the end. Number 7 was date with a promise. Number 8 was date without a promise. Number 9, date with open communication. Number 10, date realistically, not idealistically. Number 11, date without a third voice. And number 12 was date with the right voice. And finally, number 13 was date with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Or put differently, date with knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Those are the 7 items I'm going to speak about in this second part. I hope you find it useful. In any case, let's get started with the first. I want to begin with the first being date with knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Apologies for the lighting. Stay focused and don't worry about the lighting. It's a beautiful day and the sun is doing what it does. In any case, you've heard me say before that by wisdom a house is built. Through and by understanding, it is established. With knowledge, its rooms are filled with beautiful treasures. Relationships are like houses. If you want a long-lasting relationship, one that will thrive and survive, you have to build it properly. An old story talks about 2 men. One built his house on a rock, and the other built his house on the sand. And the winds and the tides came. And here is the first part of the lesson from that story. It doesn't matter whether you're a good person or a bad person. It doesn't matter what relationships you have. You will come to your, what I call, a moment of tests and trials. Do not go into relationships with naivety, without building the right foundation. Now, going back to the story, the account of the story says that when the winds came and the tides came, the house that was built on the rock withstood all of that turbulence and external push and pressures and all of that. Unfortunately, the one built on the sand did not. And here was what I find interesting. There's a possibility that at the time both parties were building their houses, it was the summer, you had the sun, you had the beautiful colors all over the place, and therefore the person building the house was building in a season that was considered to be favorable. Life evolves through seasons. The second person recognized that winter is coming, autumn will come, spring will come, the rain will come, and so they considered the entire duration of how long they wanted to be in that particular property, and they made modifications. They realized the foundation was the most important part. Wisdom is how you build the right foundation for a relationship. Knowledge is how you start the process. Let me give you a good example. It's something that perhaps I would hope that you would take to heart. The biggest problem we have, and the biggest problem people face, the biggest problem I faced for many years, and I still face every day in several parts of my life, is an ignorance problem. You don't have a relationship problem. You have an ignorance problem. There's something you do not know, and the absence of that knowledge is causing you to suffer. Let me deviate. I do this often, but I hope I come back to the message. And this, I think, is very, very important. I was speaking with a loved one yesterday, and I said something that I think pertains very closely to what I am sharing now. If you go back to the hunter-gatherer days, what you found is the mortality rate was abysmal. People died for reasons that could have been avoided. At that time, we did not have enough knowledge, and we were not sharing ideas very quickly. Our ideas were not having sex and therefore recreating, because we stayed within tribes. For that reason, our ideas, bad ideas particularly, survived and we died. You only have two options. You either die or your bad ideas die. Good ideas take care of themselves. They enable us to thrive. Bad ideas, repeated over time, repeated with enthusiasm, repeated with arrogance, means we sacrifice our lives. So every single day, what were you doing? And in this conversations I'm having with you, the idea is to share, or the purpose is to share my ideas, so that bad ideas that I have die, but most importantly, so I can challenge your ideas, so the bad ideas you have in your heart also die. When I get feedback or comments, it's an opportunity for me to review and revisit my ideas. When we do not allow bad ideas to die, then we sacrifice ourselves in lieu of our bad ideas. The only problem we have in this world is an ignorance problem. If you have problems in your relationship, the problem is not with the relationship. The problem is with you. You have an ignorance problem. Just as in the same way, if you have money issues, it's not a money problem. It's a lack of wisdom and an ignorance problem. Now, follow me quickly. I'll go very fast. If ignorance is the most important cause of all of our pain and all of our strife, it begs the question, what can we do? And what is the antidote to our ignorance? Well, to understand the antidote and the steps to take, let me go through a thought process that I think might help. Ignorance is what I will call a negative form of vibration. But ignorance, unfortunately, in the human mind leads to worry and doubt. If you have ignorance long enough, you will have worry. Most people in relationships go around with worry in their minds, in their hearts, and doubts in their minds and in their hearts as a result of the ignorance they have. Ignorance in the mind will always turn into fear, which is partly why you see women who date men that always are apprehensive, fearful. You see men who date women always fearful. Why? Not because of the external risks, but because of how we feel inside, the ignorance we have. Ignorance will lead to worry and doubt. Worry and doubt will be translated to fear. Now, fear has to be manifested through the human body. That takes place through anxiety. Anxiety, unfortunately, has a fascinating thing and how it expresses itself. Most people suppress their anxiety. Suppressed, that anxiety will lead to depression. Depression will lead, unfortunately, as a result of you not being relaxed. You will find actually that you're suppressing your emotions, you're pulling down your possibilities. That causes you to be, either the relationship or yourself, to be in a state of disease. Dis-ease. Disease that persists for a long enough time will lead to destruction and disintegration and dissolution of the relationship. That's a pathway. What I've given you is the cause effect of the ignorance you have. On the other hand, the antidote to ignorance is knowledge. Now, I said by wisdom a house is built, through understanding is established, and through knowledge its rooms are filled with beautiful treasures. The opposite of ignorance is knowledge. But we get knowledge through study. So one of my encouraging words to you is, get curious about men, study men. Men, get curious about women, study women, so that you're not going into the relationship ignorant. Through study, you gain understanding. Understanding has a fascinating way of manifesting itself. Rather than fear, you have faith. Faith simply is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Faith comes by hearing, but also faith leaves by hearing. Now, this is an important statement. I will talk about this statement when I talk about the other 7 items that I have in mind for today. Faith comes by hearing. Faith leaves by what you hear. Fear comes by what you hear. Fear leaves by what you hear. We call it the power of displacement. I walk into the house and I can switch on the light and darkness disappears. Darkness is displaced. I walk out, I switch off the light, assuming it had been on. Darkness displaces light. So faith, as a result of your understanding, will cause you and will manifest itself through your body. It always does so, as well-being. People who have faith have a sense of well-being. Now, rather than be depressed, people who have faith are at ease. But here's the key thing: they accelerate. They are in a state of acceleration, which is why you can meet 2 people who are in the right place, mentally, spiritually, physically, and they start dating, and within 6 months they are married, and they remain married for 30, 40 years. Why? Acceleration. Acceleration created as a result of their well-being, internal and external, based on their faith, based on their understanding, and based on the pursuit of knowledge that they have. That acceleration, rather than be depressed, is expressed. Now, pay attention to people you know who have a loving relationship. They're very expressive. Remember, I talk about fear getting suppressed. Anxiety being suppressed leads to depression. Those who have faith and well-being express their emotions and express their excitement. That causes them to move into a state of creation. Creativity is a product of being at ease. The creation manifests through the body as relaxation. People are relaxed. That leads to life and success. So, in today's session, remember I inverted the 7 items. I began with date with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Now, number 2, date with the right voice. Date with the right voice. The first question I would hope you would ask is, what does the right voice mean? There is no one answer that fits everyone. I'm going to give you my interpretation in the short time that I have with you. I talked to yesterday about 2 places that people tend to go to to find what they deserve, or what they want, or what they think they're entitled to, or what they hope to make into something special. The first is what I call the dating marketplace, short-term, medium-term experiences. The second is the relationship marketplace, or the marriage marketplace, or people looking for long-term meaningful relationships. When I talk about dating with the third voice, I'm referring to long-term relationships. And when I'm talking about the right voice, I'm also talking about long-term relationships. So let me deal with number 2, date with the right voice. I have been baffled, and I have had the experience myself, baffled at people who start dating at 22, 19, 22, 23, 24, 25, and dating seriously, and have not allowed their parents to be part of that process. I disagree with that process, by the way, of doing it independently. And here is the reason. At 18, you're simply an adult, but you're not an independent thinker, and you're not independent in your own right. Most people still going to college, 18 to 22. So 23 for me is when I start to judge people's emotional maturity and their independence. It's partly why when I have conversations with younger people, if you're 23 years and younger, I have very little appetite for what you have to say, because everything is theoretical. You haven't actually lived. Your college years, you're still dependent on dad or mom or the state. You're still not independent. You haven't had any lived experience, really, in the grand scheme of things. From 24 onwards, I can entertain, but I have to adjust what you say based on your lived experience. It's a very simple thing. The right voices should be people who love and care for you. But people who love and care for you, who have good faith, who come in good faith, who have come with a peaceable demeanor, and who are objective and fair. There should be people in your family or an inner circle of friends. But more importantly, there should be people who you look up to as mentors and teachers and coaches. Everyone above 18, and here is the best advice I can give you ever, you should have a coach. From 18 onwards, you should have a coach. Someone you pay, someone who's a mentor. A mentor or coach is someone who loves you and cares for you too much to leave you the way you are. A father, a loved one, a friend, an inner circle is someone who loves you just the way you are. Friends accept you as you are. And guess what? You're not good enough. Most of the time I've seen friends refuse to give good advice. Why? For fear that they might ruin a relationship they have with you. A mentor, on the other hand, is independent. They can look at your face and look into your eyes and simply say, you're wrong. You're making the wrong choices. You need to have a mentor, a coach, from 18 and above. It doesn't matter how great your father is, your mother is, your loved ones are. You need a mentor and a coach. A third, the right voice, therefore, are people who can pour into you words of wisdom, words of understanding, and words of knowledge. Most people do not have the appetite to seek knowledge, to seek understanding, and to seek wisdom. In the sessions that I do these sessions as partly as a way of sharing, because I knew at some point in my life I was looking for those answers, and I made a lot of mistakes because I had no one to pour into me. I went searching for answers. You need the right voices around you, and it takes some time to come to a place of knowing that you have a right voice around you, which is partly why I say you need a coach or a mentor. You need someone you pay. And here's the key thing. Good advice. I know in this day and age of social media and sharing as I do, but good advice has a cost. It comes with some value. Yes, you might get free advice about your relationship woes and issues from someone. As a matter of fact, if you stopped in the middle of the streets and you are a woman and you just say, I'm having problems, even a skunk, even a beggar will give you his advice. If you are a man and you walk into a pub or a bar and you start talking about your problems, the bartender, the drunks will give you advice. But if you walk into a professional's office, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a counselor, a therapist, a business person and you said, I need some advice and I'm willing to pay for your time. They always believe in equal and fair exchange, so they want to make sure that they give you the right advice. I tend to lean more towards professionals than I lean towards family, because guess what? You are a product of your family. And if you are having problems, sometimes it is an indication that your parents possibly made some mistakes in not instilling in you the critical pathways of thinking, or providing the pathway for you to return back to them and share your concerns. Now, number 3 is date without a third voice. Second was date with the right voices. Third, date without a third voice. A third voice is what I describe as voices of doubt, voices of destruction, voices that are not wise, voices that cause ignorance, fear, worry and doubt in you. Everybody has such voices around them. For some people, it's manifested on a regular basis, and for others, it's dispersed and distributed over say, months and years. I have been stunned at how much and how well regularly relationships are destroyed because of a third voice. You meet people, the relationships begin, they blossom, and then suddenly something changes. One person's demeanor changes, or another person's demeanor fluctuates. Why? They start to listen to other people's voices who are pouring bad advice into the relationship. Now, here is a good thing to remember. Your worst enemy can put sugar in your tea and you drink it and nothing happens to you. But your best friend, even by mistake, whether that mistake is intentional or whether the advice is in ignorance, can put poison in your tea, in error, not intentionally, and still have you killed. The key point, therefore, is to keep a close eye on who puts something into your coffee or your tea. Pay attention to your cup. People are pouring into you. You should have a gate system. Stand guard at the gate of your ears, your eyes, and your presence. Choose who you are around, because people are influencing you in a subtle way on a daily basis. And their influence are like seeds planted in the soil. They will bear much fruit, sometimes at the wrong time, sometimes when you do not expect. So pay attention to the third voices in your family, third voices in your friendship group, third voices through influence. For example, if you do disagree with everything that I share and everything I stand for, you might consider me a third voice. So pay attention to third voices on social media and platforms such as mine, because you have to be careful about what you're hearing. Sometimes all of the fear you have has come from what you've heard, what you've seen, based on your ignorance. Remember, I gave you the steps. Ignorance will always lead to worry and doubt. Worry and doubt will cause fear. Fear has to be manifested through the body as anxiety. Anxiety, usually people tend to suppress the anxiety. That causes depression. That leads to you being in a state of disease, leads to destruction of the relationship. Pay attention to the third voice. Now, number 4, date realistically, not idealistically. Say that again. Date realistically, not idealistically. I am fascinated at people who are up in their feelings, often based on what I share. But what I share, this has been known but suppressed in the West for many, many years. For example, the idealistic approach is to assume that all people have good intentions and all men are good. Now, we know that is not true. If you have a daughter that's 13 years, you should have conversations very early to say, do not listen to what younger men say. If you try to please, suddenly you could get pregnant. So we know that the promise that men give women are not always backed up by anything of substance. Men will say anything, Some men will sell their birthrights just for an experience. That's what history is filled with. So, ideally, yes, you believe everybody is good. Ideally, you believe everyone has the same intentions as you do. Realistically, that is seldom the case. Realistic dating simply means you start from the very bottom, the foundation, the biology. Men and women are different. Our needs, although our needs come from a similar place, we want different things. From a biological level, men do not want the same things that women want. We have different love languages. Therefore, you have to understand what a man wants, and a woman has to be aware of how to give a man what he wants. A man has to understand what the woman wants and has to know how to give her what she wants. Foundational. Then you build up from that. I talk about all of these in my various videos from the past, but I'll give you an interesting one. There's an ideal that women have, that they're looking for men who are going to be faithful, men who will not cheat, men who will not bring any form of infidelity to the relationship. It's not my place to change what you want. I will simply tell you that if you've studied any of the things I have shared, one of the things I talk about very carefully is something called the balance of power. Men will promise anything and everything at the early stage of a relationship, and the younger he is, and the younger you are, because the balance of power is in your favor. You have youth, beauty, femininity, chastity. So if you're 21, you are at the peak of your value based on what men want. A man who's 21 has nothing but potential. He's achieved absolutely nothing. He cannot afford your beauty. So we will say any and everything just to have you give us a piece of you. Once we've achieved that, once we've tasted that, suddenly we are open into the knowledge of good and evil. And over time, what tends to happen is we start to convert some of our potential into actuality. So the same man at 21 who is head over heels in love with you, you being 21, what you find is when he turns 35, he's earning a lot of money. Now suddenly he can afford women who are 10 years your junior, 15 years your junior, and suddenly his behavior starts to change. You were able to satisfy him early days, but at 35, perhaps he has wandering eyes. And I was explaining, and I have explained, how the power dynamics changes. Men are only as faithful as the temptations they overcome. That's the first. Keep that in your mind. Number two, men are only as faithful as the opportunities they can afford. That is realistic dating. Idealistically is all men, and the men that I date will be faithful in perpetuity. Here's another realistic dating. I don't care how beautiful you are. Your beauty cannot stop him from wandering, or cannot stop his wandering eyes. The only thing that stops him is his conscience, based on the temptations he has overcome. The test for money, the test for fame and power, the test for sex. Every man goes through that process. A man who hasn't gone through that process and who hasn't overcome, the inner part of him will fail. It's only a matter of time and place. That is realistic. By understanding this realism, what happens is you have a tragic view of the world, but it's a realistic view. And therefore, in your relationships, you don't start with this high expectations. I always encourage young girls, and women generally, and even men, begin with low expectations. Where you have expectations, you're bound to have disappointments, because people change and people are humans. People will fall short of your expectations. And if you're too rigid in your expectations, that will lead to sometimes the destruction of the relationship. Why? Unfulfilled expectations. So keep that in mind. I encourage you to be optimistic about dating. I also encourage you to be pessimistic about dating. But here is perhaps the most important gift I'll give you. Be skeptical. Be skeptical. Skepticism calls for optimism when pessimism is excessive. But skepticism also calls for pessimism when optimism is excessive. Any extreme is wrong. You need to be skeptical. And that simply means recognize that men are simply an extension of the animal kingdom. We're no different from the beasts, although other than the fact that we have a mind and the ability to choose. There's an animal part of who we are. Therefore, recognize our shortfalls and our shortcomings, and don't pedestalize either the man or the woman. Recognize people fail, people fall short. Date with realism rather than from an ideal place. Now, number 5. So I've given you number 5, yes. Date with open communication. The biggest issue in relationships, from my experience, is the need or the feeling that you haven't been heard. Everyday people communicate, but they do so in a language that both parties are not very well versed in, and therefore they're speaking not necessarily to each other, but through each other. Somehow the message is lost. And that's because there isn't open communication or patience. And here is an important part to understand. The ability to listen, summarize what the person has said, and present it back to them is a great way of giving the other person, or gifting the other person, the opportunity to be heard. So we have a conversation and I listen intently, and at the end I summarize what I've heard you say, and you confirm whether my understanding and my summary is consistent with what you feel. We hear with our ears, we listen with our emotions. Most people hear what other people say, very few people listen. Listen is a skill we have to learn. And open communication simply means from the get-go, from the first date, you're open in your communication. I have found most people are too worried about how they will be perceived. I know people in relationships that are terrified, petrified about the future, but they cannot bring that to the table for fear that the other person will get worried, get angry, and leave. So it's almost like a catch-22 situation. You're in a relationship, and this happens more so with women than it does with men. You've been in a relationship for 7 years. You've made the mistake of not expressing what you really want. And 7 years into the relationship, you can't ask your significant other where this is going. And you can't make ultimatums, because I've said before, ultimatums are not necessary. They always backfire. So certainly what you do not want is a slave, someone in a relationship without their free will. You never make ultimatums. And I know people who have remained in relationships because they did not begin with open communication. They wanted a family. They met someone who did not want to have kids and did not want to get married, but they were so drawn to the person, they stayed in the relationship. And they suppressed that need for a family, suppressed the need for marriage, suppressed the need for kids. And 7, 8 years down the line, internally they are frustrated. Why? They never began openly communicating how they felt or what they wanted. And so it's too late. So when you date, always date with open communication. Most people cannot hear or see what's in your mind's eye. One of the fascinating things I learned about life was it didn't matter how great you were as a father or a mother, a brother or friend. You will never feel what the other person feels. Feelings, unfortunately, are personal. Now, we embody our emotions, and therefore you can, through the embodied process, empathize based on what you believe someone is feeling, and based on other examples you use, or based on experiences you may have had. But you will never feel exactly how another person feels. Therefore, what is not said is not known. Share your thoughts, your feelings, your hopes and your dreams through open communication. And number 6 is date with a promise. Date with a promise. I I was thinking about how to speak about this date with a promise, and I struggled because I realized that when we use the word promise, it invokes an initial experience of indebtedness to another person. That if I make a promise to you, now I am indebted to you. So most people do not make promises. Mary and Joseph start dating. They date for 5 years, and they get married on the 7th, or on their 7th. They get married and they exchange their vows. Prior to the marriage, Mary assumes, in her head, never had open communication, so she just assumes that there are certain protocols that have been established, and rules that have been established, and decorums that have been established. There are certain, what I'll call a mission statement for the union, a vision for the union, a code of conduct for both parties in the union. All of this in her head. She never openly communicated this. No promises were made. And remember, Joseph came into the relationship, never making any promises. Mary came into the relationship, never making any promises, but with assumptions. Both parties assume. And there's always going to be an issue why promises were not made. So I tend to encourage women and men, when it comes to integrity, your word is as good as you. When you say the words, you give power to those words. They become flesh. Therefore, you are limited. If you believe in integrity, you're limited by what you say. So I encourage women to get men to make promises around the relationship. What's your promise about kindness towards me and my loved ones? What's your promise towards me with regards to being honest, faithful, forgiving, provision, protection? Talk about his promises and let him say, I promise X and Y and Z, so that he declares his intentions through a promise. We make promises to human beings, we make vows to God. Now, although she got married in the 7th year, the marriage vow is not a promise covering every single part of life and relationships. It talks about love. Now, I can love you, but I can still hurt you. They're still not mutually exclusive. I can love you, but I can do things that hurt you. So you should establish from day one, what are his promises? Write it down. So that when the time comes, you can take back his words to him and say, these are the words you gave me. This is what you said to me. I'm holding you to your words. I expect you to have integrity. And that should be vice versa. Have a promise about everything. I've seen people who said, well, we took a vow. Well, a vow doesn't cover infidelity or cheating. It doesn't. A vow doesn't talk about the fact that he has to provide for you at a certain level. It doesn't. A vow doesn't talk about the fact that he has to be honest. It doesn't. A vow simply covers areas that simply says, for better, for worse, I'm committing myself to you in sickness and in health, whether we're poor, whether we're rich, until death, and to love you. End. We give marriage vows more than it is supposed to carry. The vow is not supposed to encompass everything about your life. That conversation should have been had within the first 3 dates. What are his promises to you? What are your promises to him? So that you guys can hold each other accountable based on your words. Now, number 7, and I close. Date without promises. 6 was date with promises. 7, date without promises. And let me explain why this is important. 2 marketplaces. The dating marketplace, the relationship marketplace. People in each marketplace have different objectives. Most of the time, people start in the first marketplace and move to the second marketplace. And I have found that most people do not know how to date. And by that, let me be more specific. Go out for a meal. Go out to a movie. Not always sex. Go out for coffee. A date is really something in its very pure form. Anything that has a place and a time. Place, time, day. That's a date. Doesn't matter whether you're walking in the park, walking the dogs, sitting for coffee, having a meal in a lovely restaurant, going back to each other's places, going out dancing. Time and a day and a place. That's a date. You can date without intimacy and without anything involving sexual interaction. Most women are horrible at dating in a platonic way, and a lot of women are also terrible at abusing that process. Most men are horrible at just dating platonically, and they abuse the process also, which is why when you date without a promise, you go 50-50. Now, I talk in some of my sessions about younger men, and I say, well, you shouldn't be paying for dates. And if you do, you shouldn't be spending more than £35 on a date. But I disagree with paying for dates for younger men. Men between 18, certainly between 18 and pre-18, all the way up to, say, 25. Why? You've got no money. You're using daddy's funds or mum's funds. 18 to 22, you are in college. And my position is more about the value of your resources. From 18 years to about 35, that's 18 long years. Most young men will spend, within that age group of 18 to about 35, will spend at least £50 per week on date. £50 per week would mean that in a year you've spent roughly 2,400. Over a 20-year period, that is 48,000. But here's the most important, profound part of the whole process. If you invested that £50 per week in a low-cost index fund, in that 20-year period, you would have close to £250,000 compounded at 10% every year. Now here's also what's fascinating. I say to young men, wait until 35 for any serious relationship. Between 18 or even 16 or sometimes 14 and 35, most relationships will be meaningless. I cannot remember people I dated when I was still a teenager. You cannot remember all the people you dated whilst you were a teenager. So, focus on your dreams and your goals and wait until you're ready and you have the right frame, and then you go out and you can court the right woman. You can date the right woman with the intention of something serious, and she should be the beneficiary of that £250,000. Not all of the women you dated before. Save your money. But this would mean if you want to date without promises, then both parties, you go Dutch if needed. The whole point being that you're not indebted to another. If a man goes out just for a coffee date and ends up spending a lot of money, suddenly the woman feels the pressure that somehow she owes him something. On the other hand, the woman might go out on a date and just simply want a casual date, nothing sexual. The man is coming expecting that because perhaps he bought her a lovely meal the week before, that he will have sex. No, you date without promises. And that simply means at the start, you make it clear to each other, there are no promises here. We're going to see how this goes. Therefore, I will provide my own financial support. You provide your financial support, and let's just keep this casual. You have to learn, people have to learn these days, how to date without promises. Men make promises often that they cannot keep. Women accept promises that they know the men cannot keep. And for some reason, eventually, one person cries foul. Well, you've heard me say before, in the first marketplace, dating is like war. It's a zero-sum game. To the victor goes the spoils. A man, through his resources, is looking to attract the most attractive woman. A woman, through her beauty, is looking to attract the most resourceful man. Men, a resource object, women, a sex object. To the victor goes the spoils. It's like war, because what a man wants, ejaculation is so powerful from a man's perspective that he would do and say anything. A woman therefore has to be very, very savvy and careful about promises, And therefore, at the early stage, the man should be very open and say, listen, I'm dating you without any promises. The woman should be clear and say, okay, I accept your date without any promises also. And let's just see how it goes. Now, that brings me to the end of the 13 items I mentioned. Let me go through each and every one of them from the start. Number 1, date with intention. Number 2, date with the end in mind. Number 3, date with specificity and date with purpose. Very important. Specificity and purpose. Date based on probabilities, not possibilities. Date with a time scale in mind. Date with review periods in that time scale. Now, we start from today's session. Number 7, date without promises. Number 8, date with promises. Number 10, or number 9, date with open communication. Number 10, date realistically, not idealistically. Number 11, date without a third voice. Number 12, date with the right voices. And number 13, and the most important in my opinion, date with knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. I hope that's been useful.